So let me introduce our guest presenter today, Elyse Moore. Elyse, besides being a friend, Elyse teaches historical hearth cooking and food history at Historic Deerfield Museum. She has a BA in history from Mount Holyoke College and a diplôme culinaire from New England Culinary Institute. Ms. Moore writes about historical perspectives on community food security and their intersection with women's history. Her writing on food topics has appeared in the Hampshire Gazette and at the Oxford Symposium on Food and Cookery. Welcome, Elise.
Thank you, and welcome to a Wisteria Hearst family holiday cooking class, old school cooking for young chefs. While this video program aims to speak to young cooks, we hope that it reaches families who wish to cook together. When families cook together, they open the door of opportunities to share a learned experience. They can learn about kitchen safety, practice creativity, apply math and reading skills to the work of understanding a recipe. And in cooking, we develop fine motor skills. We can learn independence and responsibility and ways to make healthy eating choices. We hope that you will enjoy your time together in the kitchen with us at Wisteria Hearst as we make a healthy holiday treat, molasses popcorn balls. As Penny said, my name is Elyse Moore, and I use historical recipes in my work as a hearth cook at Historic Deerfield Museum. In that work, I find and select historical recipes from old cookbooks written when people cooked in kitchens that used only open hearth cooking fires and wood fired bake ovens. And I try to cook an authentic reproduction of that recipe at the museum's wood fired hearth. Then I use my cooking experience to produce a modernized version of the recipe that can be recreated in today's home kitchens. I believe that by working to understand old recipes, we can create positive connections to our history and to our culture. Popcorn has been a popular snack food for more than 100 years, but the growing of corn and the use of popcorn dates back thousands of years. In this video, we will hear a little about the history of growing and the consumption of popcorn and about how popcorn became a popular snack food. We will also find out about why corn pops, the nutritional value of our recipe, and different ways of popping corn before jumping into the kitchen and making a special version of the popcorn ball recipe we have chosen to share with you in this video. Could you advance the slide, please? Because of this recipe's connection to the first residents of Wisteria Hearst, the Skinners, I'd like to share a little bit about the Skinner family history of involvement in community cooking projects. The Skinner family had a history of participation in community food projects at home and abroad. Mrs. Sarah Skinner contributed 2 family recipes to the community cookbook we will use today, 625 choice recipes. The Skinners' youngest daughter, Catherine Kitty Skinner Kilborn, was likely about 16 years old when she sat for this photograph as a member of the Holyoke Cooking Club in 1889. Then in 1902, Kitty and her sister Belle teamed up to open the Skinner Coffee House in memory of their late father, a project that provided affordable lunches for some of Holyoke's women factory workers. The Skinner Coffee House also hosted a number of ethnic clubs that organized ethnic community dinners, African American, uh, Polish, Italian, and French. And this was all in the early 20th century. And in 1918, following World War I, Belle Skinner undertook a community rebuilding project, helping to restore one French village. That project included numerous food programs to benefit the town and its residents at their hilltop village of Hatton-Châtel and in the valley below. They were destroyed during the war. They planted new fruit orchards and provided the equipment to maintain the orchard. They provided food for the people as they rebuilt, and they celebrated with the people the first stages of the completion of uh, rebuilding that village in 1924, and later for other holidays. For her efforts and contributions, Belle Skinner received 2 national awards from the French government and was dubbed the village's fairy godmother by its residents. Popcorn is one of 6 types of corn known by its Latin name, Zea mays everta, and it's a very old type of corn. Like other types of corn, popcorn was first grown in the Americas by Native Americans. Evidence of popcorn grown in New Mexico dates back more than 2,000 years, but popcorn may not have been in continuous use from that time to the present. The evidence was found in 1948 when kernels of an early Zea mays averta variety capable of being popped were found in an archaeological dig in west central New Mexico in a rock shelter known as Bat Cave. Yep, not that Bat Cave. The site was known to have been occupied by Native American cave dwellers practicing primitive agriculture about 3,000 years ago. There, anthropologists found tiny cobs of popcorn in which each kernel was enclosed in its own husk, some of which were expanded or naturally popped. By the late 1800s, popcorn had gained wide popularity in much of America and was being popped in steam-driven machines mounted on push carts or even sometimes hitched to horse-drawn wagons. Popcorn was bagged and sold for 5 to 10 cents a bag wherever crowds gathered, at fairs, festivals, and at parades and sporting events. In the 1920s and 30s, popcorn sales found their way into the movie theaters, and popcorn became one of America's favorite snack foods. Have you ever enjoyed popcorn at the movies or at some other event? Buttered, caramel, or some other flavor? Although popcorn is typically thought of as a snack food today, it was once a popular breakfast food and very likely an early model for the breakfast cereals we know today. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, popcorn was eaten with milk or cream and sometimes sugar, just as we eat breakfast cereals today. So, how does popcorn pop anyway? The US Department of Agriculture explains it this way: a kernel of popcorn contains a small amount of water stored inside a circle of soft starch. This is why popcorn needs to maintain a certain level of moisture, about 14.5 to 16%. The soft starch is surrounded by the kernel's hard outer surface. As the kernel heats up, the water expands, building pressure against the hard starch surface. Eventually, this outer layer gives way, causing the popcorn to explode. As it explodes, the soft starch inside the popcorn becomes inflated and bursts and turns the kernel inside out. The steam inside the kernel is released and the popcorn is popped. The popped kernels of corn can expand 20 to 50 times their original volume. So when we think about our recipe today, which uses 4 quarts of popped popcorn, we will only need a half a cup of unpopped kernels to produce 4 quarts. How much popcorn would you need for just a snack at home? We can advance the slide now. Now today we're going old school and we're going to pop our popcorn on the stove in a saucepan. But there are many other types of corn poppers, and here are a few, starting at the top. It's possible that the popping of corn may have been discovered when an ear of an early type of Zea mays averta popped its kernels when it came into contact with fire. And popcorn is still popped over the open fire while camping or at a picnic by using a basket or other metal container like this one with a long handle and held over the fire until the kernels are heated to the point of popping. Underneath that wire basket, we see an old-fashioned street vendor's steam-driven popcorn popper on a pushcart from the 1800s. Next to it is the type of tabletop popper commonly seen in movie theaters. Smaller versions of this type of popper are also available for home use. Back to the top of the slide, the red appliance with the opening at the top is a hot air popper. Hot air poppers produce popcorn without using any oil, and the popcorn they pop has the least number of calories per serving. Although it should be noted that oil popped popcorn only adds about 5 calories per serving, about 35 as opposed to 30. Another hot air popper, the Star Wars R2D2 hot air popper, is what we sometimes call a novelty brand, using another branded trademark, in this case, the movie Star Wars, to appeal to fans of both popcorn and the movie it models. The last popper at the top right of the slide is a popular stove top model that is made by several different companies. This popper uses the oil popping method, and once the popcorn begins to pop, the person operating the popper turns the crank, keeping the popped kernels moving and the popcorn aloft above the unpopped kernels below. And finally, we see a simple saucepan, a perfectly suitable vessel for popping popcorn. Do you have a popcorn popper? What kind of popcorn popper do you have? Have you ever popped corn at the stove using a saucepan? Okay, let's get going. We selected our recipe from a cookbook published in 1886 by the Transcript Publishing Company in Holyoke. 625 recipes from the ladies of the Second Congregational Church of Holyoke, Mass. The cookbook is a collection of recipes, each recipe signed by its contributor, put together and shared by the members of the church on Appleton Street. Like other community cookbooks, 625 choice recipes was written as a fundraising project. Community cookbooks are often books of recipes collected by groups such as churches, but also schools, social clubs, and these recipes are organized into a book and sold to raise money. Proceeds from cookbook sales would often be used to pay for other good works. Nantucket Receipts, a Boston cookbook published in the 1870s to raise funds for a local hospital, has been cited as the country's first community cookbook. Does your family have any community cookbooks in your cookbook collection? A member of the Second Congregational Church, Mrs. Sarah Skinner, contributed 2 recipes to the project. Mrs. Skinner lived with her husband and 6 children at Wistariahurst, her home from 1874 until her death in 1908. In the cookbook, she signed her recipes as Mrs. William Skinner. Her recipes for Christmas, plum pudding, and Thanksgiving cake indicate her interest in holiday foods. On to the recipe. We have chosen another holiday recipe for today's Young Chefs project, molasses popcorn balls. It was contributed by Georgie Bardwell, as you can see in this slide. We have not been able to find out anything about Georgie Bardwell, but maybe someone listening today will know something about her and contact the museum with any information you might have about her life. Okay, let's get ready to cook. After testing the 1886 recipe a few times, I revised the recipe to include a little more sugar for the amount of molasses used. It makes it just a little bit firmer. Let's read through the old recipe first. Sometimes with old recipes, you may need to gather more information before proceeding. One of the ingredient measurements calls for a piece of butter the size of a walnut. Well, what is that? Well, butter the size of a walnut is a classic old school measurement language. Solving the mysteries of old measurement and ingredient language can be part of the fun of cooking from old cookbooks or maybe from an old family recipe. If you don't know what something is, you can always use a dictionary or the internet to try to find the answer. Butter the size of a walnut is roughly about 2 tablespoons. And since we are making a half recipe, our recipe will use 1 tablespoon of butter. Another another phrase in this recipe, boil until it strings. It's a direction for making the molasses syrup in this recipe, which relates to something called the cold water method, a way of calculating the stage of a cooked sugar syrup without a thermometer. The candy thermometer did not become available to most housekeepers until the early 1900s, when it appeared in advertisements and in recipes. So cooks like Georgie Bardwell would have used the cold water method. And we will use a candy thermometer, but we will also show you this alternative method of testing sugar syrups when we get to the making of the molasses syrup in the recipe. First, gather your ingredients and measure them. Putting them together in the order in which you will be using them will make it easier to proceed through, back up please, through the steps of the recipes. We will be making the popcorn on the stove top in a covered saucepan, or if you have another popcorn maker that you typically use for popping corn, of course, that's fine. But if you are making your popcorn on the stovetop, as I will be, use a mild vegetable oil like sunflower or canola. You'll need a half a cup of popcorn and about 1.5 tablespoons of oil for this step. A place and a place, if you could place a large bowl near the stove, you'll have a place to pour your popcorn when it's done so that it doesn't, the steam from making the popcorn doesn't make the popcorn soggy. Measure your ingredients for the molasses syrup as well. For the syrup, you will need 3/4 of a cup of medium molasses, 3/8 of a cup of sugar, 1 teaspoon of vinegar. I used cider vinegar, but white vinegar works just as well, and a pinch of salt, which is optional. And for the equipment, you will need measuring cups and spoons and pans, one for the popcorn, one for the syrup, and a few mixing bowls for holding and mixing the popcorn with the syrup, and some pot holders near the cooking area. And if you'd like to try testing your syrup using the old-fashioned cold water method, you'll just need a glass of cold water and a small ladle or spoon to collect the syrup from the pan as it's boiling. Next, I will want to use a rubber spatula for moving the molasses from the measuring cup and then from the pan, and the hot syrup for folding into the popcorn. So I have this red one. The red is a sign that the spatula can withstand heat. That will be good for the syrup making. And one special piece of equipment here is a candy thermometer to help us know when the syrup is cooked enough to add it to the popcorn. I have a ruler style thermometer, but there are other types as well. You can see that there's a glass thermometer and the ruler type, which I have, a dial thermometer. It's got a dial readout, and then a digital candy thermometer, which a lot of people have these days. Okay. So turn on your stove to high to preheat your pan. I like to use a heavy bottomed pan like this one I'm showing you here. And I like a glass top too, so that I can see the popcorn pop through the top. Once your burner is nice and warm, you can um, preheat your pan and then add the oil to it. Let the oil heat up um, all around the bottom of the pan. Um, uh, and before you add, you can see that it's shimmering there. Before you add the popcorn, the oil should be plenty hot, but not smoking hot. Okay, so we're adding the popcorn. You should hear a sizzle when and you can see it sizzling actually. Um, and if you shake the pan around a bit so that all the kernels can be coated with oil, oh, it's starting to pop already. This is a great thing. All the kernels should be coated with the hot oil, and then it will pop pretty quickly. The goal of popping corn on the stovetop is to heat the popcorn quickly and evenly. So shaking the popcorn helps in this process. And then comes the sound and the steam and the aroma of oil popped corn. It's what some people call comfort food, that combination of sights and smells and sounds and the anticipation of something delicious about to be made. For me, popcorn is comfort food. I love making popcorn on the stove, just like my grandmother and my great grandmother would have done. Sometimes in those seconds or minutes when the corn is popping, I think about things like that, and it connects me to them. And before you know it, the popcorn is finished popping, and you can pour your popcorn into the bowl that you have waiting. And then it is time for a little creativity. It is Christmas time, and I want to do something special with these popcorn balls. Something that would have been available to old school cooks. Not like craft caramels or chocolate chips or sprinkles, but spice. The more I use old recipes, the more I understand how important spices were to cooks of the old days. They were a luxury and hinted at plants that grew far away, that produced interesting and delicious flavors. Used in combination, they often take on a whole that is more than somehow the sum of its parts. For instance, you may not like clove as a spice by itself, but when you taste clove with nutmeg that I've just grated here, and cinnamon, molasses, and popcorn, it has a different flavor profile, which is a phrase that some cooks use to describe a combination of flavors. So here we're going to use clove, nutmeg, and cinnamon in roughly equal proportions to flavor the syrup once it's cooked to the desired temperature and right before coating the popcorn. The heat of the syrup for just those few seconds brings out the flavors of the spice and then cools down as soon as it's poured. All right, spices are ready, and we are almost ready here to make, oh, there's the overfilled spice container. Now we're going to measure our ingredients and bring them close to the pan for making the firm ball molasses syrup. I'm going to bring all my equipment and ingredients close to the stove, measuring butter. You can see I've got everything ready, and I'm going to use that heavy bottomed pan and add the molasses to it. You can see my candy thermometer over there on the left, getting ready to be added, but I'm not going to use the candy thermometer until we've got a boiling syrup. First, I've turned on the heat, and you can see the red underneath. I want that hot molasses to dissolve the sugar that I'm adding now. I'm going to stir it around a little bit with my spatula that is heat resistant, and I'm waiting for the the syrup to be dissolved enough to add the butter. I'll stir that in, and the butter will melt as the syrup heats up a little bit. And once the butter has melted, I'll add the vinegar and a pinch of salt. That's my salt box. I stir until it comes to a boil. It takes a couple minutes for that to happen, but not long. Once everything is incorporated and makes a sort of homogeneous looking syrup in there, I can stop stirring and clean off my spatula and just scrape any remaining syrup that's sticking to the spatula on the side of the pan and set it aside. Hopefully you've got some place to set your syrup, your spatula. And now that it's starting to boil, I can clip my candy thermometer to the side of the pan. You can see the steam coming up and the syrup bubbling, and already the temperature is rising. You can see on the left-hand side the cold water method: thread, firm ball, crack, soft crack, hard crack. Those relate to the temperatures that they're next to, and we're going to use that method of the cold water method of testing our syrup as well. While the syrup is maturing in the pan, you can butter a bowl, or maybe you had it buttered ahead of time. I'm making this by myself, but if you're working together with a family team or a couple of friends, maybe an adult could definitely do the syrup part. It's very, it can be very dangerous, and watching the syrup pan is an important job. And the people who are working at the stove have to be very, very careful. Safety is the most important thing. But next to that safety, the other important thing is to make sure that the syrup reaches the desired temperature without going beyond that point. And the point we're looking for is 260 degrees Fahrenheit. So the syrup, now we're going to test the syrup using the cold water method. I just need a tiny bit, and pour it into a glass of water, and you can see that it threads just like that direction that we read in the recipe. And here are the stages. I've taken the syrup out of the cold water, and you can see that it's a firm ball, but I can still kind of squeeze it. That's what a firm ball looks like. And when I squeeze it between my finger and thumb, it's still soft. We've reached 260 degrees, and now I'm pouring the spices in, and I want to incorporate them quickly into the syrup so that they develop their flavors, but I don't want to burn those spices. So as soon as they're As soon as they're incorporated, I will set that little ladle aside and begin to pour our spiced molasses syrup over the popcorn. Turning off the stove is important. Using the rubber spatula to get every last bit of the syrup, if you can, out of the pan where you cooked it, so that the measurements that you took care to to prepare are right for the amount of popcorn that you have measured, the 4 quarts of popcorn that you've measured into your bowl. One of the things I noticed about the old recipe is it didn't say how much popcorn. I guess everyone just knew how to make popcorn balls, and you had a certain amount that was always going to be right. But here you can see that I'm folding it to completely coat as many popcorn kernels as possible. It's still very hot, so while I'm holding onto the side of the bowl, I'm very careful not to touch the bottom of it. You may want to use mitts or gloves for this stage if you're sensitive to the heat. I've been working around sugar syrups a long time, so I don't use it, but it's a good idea to do that. And once it's completely incorporated like that, I'll just take the last bit off my spatula, wait for it to cool a little bit, and then butter my hands. This is my favorite part, and begin to form the popcorn balls. You can make them any size, but a popcorn ball about the size of a baseball like that has about twice as much molasses as the recommended daily serving, which is to say it has about 2 tablespoons and the recommended serving is 1. So if you're conscious of calories, you could make your popcorn balls a little bit smaller, or you might just cut one in half and share it with a friend. But it's a good idea to keep track of these kinds of things. Now, when you're using spices in your popcorn ball syrup, you don't have to use what I used. You can use, whatever appeals to your taste. I mean, you could use chili powder and cumin and chipotle pepper, or cardamom and star anise, cinnamon and black pepper like pfeffernusse. Use your creativity, make something new. Stir the spices into the syrup until they're completely incorporated, but then, you can just make your popcorn balls. So let's see, a large popcorn ball will have roughly 170 calories, 5 grams of fat, 4 milligrams of cholesterol, 159 milligrams of sodium, 25 grams of carbohydrate, which is 22 sugars, and 2 to 3 grams of fiber, and 1 gram of protein. Molasses has several important minerals, and of all the sugars, it has the most nutritional value. There, now we've got our popcorn balls formed, and don't forget to taste a little bit. Packaging can be as simple as wrapping in waxed paper or plastic wrap. Add a little bow if you want to, and then you're done. It's probably a good idea to wash your hands before doing the packaging. You can see that I didn't really do that. Oh well. So let's review. Collect your measured ingredients and equipment. Use great care with adult supervision around the stove. Work as a team. Some tasks are good for all ages. And use your creativity. So tell me, what would you do to make these old style molasses popcorn balls special? What are your favorite spice flavors? And what are your ideas for other old recipes? 625 recipes, choice recipes, is a great little cookbook that you can find at the Wisteria Hearst Museum archives. and tells us something about the things people ate in Holyoke more than 100 years ago. Reading old cookbooks is great fun, and you might just find another recipe that you can make with your family. Why don't you pay them a visit at Wisteria Hearst Archives and read this cookbook? You can see that I've just got one little, yeah, one in the middle. Here we go. Thanks a lot for visiting Wisteria Hearst. Oh, yes, you can see what they look like in the middle here. And don't forget to taste a little bit before you allow other people to eat it to make sure it's exactly right, because the proof is always in the pudding. Thank you. Not hearing any sound.
Yay! Thank you, Elise. That was lovely. And having
Mhm.
tasted those popcorn balls, they were delicious. And like she said, I don't normally like clove, but the combination with the other cinnamon and the other spices were really made it delicious. Delicious. So I had a question, and I'm opening up if anyone else has any questions that they want to ask Elise. What is molasses? How is it made from sugar? And can you substitute honey instead of molasses?
Yes, well, molasses is the byproduct of making granulated cane sugar. So um, it is something that is left over from the granulated stage. So it's still very sweet, um, uh, and when it's boiled down, um, the granulated part of the sugar is extracted, and the molasses becomes the byproduct. Um, you can use honey instead of molasses. Um, I don't have a recipe for it here, but recipes are one of those things that are very easily found on various cooking sites, blogs. There's a lot of historical cooking blogs, and people did use honey. So, yeah, look for that. You can use a combination of honey and molasses or honey and maple syrup. I've seen popcorn ball recipes that use a combination of honey and maple syrup. And I actually lived next door to a sugar farm many years ago, and my next door neighbor Audrey made popcorn balls with maple syrup herself. Yeah.
I have another question actually for Pat Swanson, because I know that you were a an usher in movie theaters in the 1930s and 40s. Did they have did they serve popcorn when you were there? Like when you were working as a teen? Are you there, Pat? Maybe not. Anyway, I just thought you suggested that they were I'm curious as to when popcorn was introduced in the movie theaters.
One thing I have a book, and I'm afraid it's going to be backwards, but I'm going to hold it up anyway. It is
Pop
called Pop
culture.
Culture, a social history of popcorn in America. Um, and one thing I learned from this book is that uh, before popcorn was allowed into movie theaters, it was sold outside the movie theater. In the days before sound came into the movies, um, uh, and there were just silent movies. They had red carpets and people dressed up in their fanciest clothes. And the very last thing they wanted was any food or beverages in there to somehow spoil the idea of it being a very high end sort of event. But eventually, when sound came into the movies, people sort of demanded that popcorn and beverages be available. And sure enough, as sound became part of the movies, and people, it was the Depression in the late 1920s and the early 1930s. And having a movie and an inexpensive bag of popcorn was an affordable luxury. So yeah, that's how it started to really gain cachet in the movie theater.
Pat, did you want to comment?
No, no.
No? Oh, I was just curious what your experience was as an usher in the day. Did they have popcorn when you were there?
It was usually sold next door to the theater
Hmm.
where they had a candy shelf or whatever, popcorn shelf, and then you brought it into the theater.
Mm.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just like she was saying. Oh, interesting. Does anyone else have any questions for Elise? I know I
I
learned a
think
lot about popcorn.
I see that there's a question about vinegar and its function in the recipe. It turns out that vinegar doesn't necessarily have a function per se, except to alter the taste. When you have something that is very, very sweet, um, in order to develop the full flavor of the molasses, having an acid will help that to create a better flavor. So vinegar with molasses creates a more full flavored syrup. I think that when we make sweet fruit ice creams or sorbets, we often will add lemon juice for the same purpose. You know, we want to have a flavor balance that is not cloyingly sweet, but not too acidic. So something like lemon juice or vinegar will help to cut that cloying sweetness. And that is really the only function of vinegar in the syrup. It's a flavor component.
Well, I tried your suggestion of different flavors in the popcorn balls. And so I made it with a sweet curry, turmeric, and cardamom. And I really enjoyed kind of making it a little more complex. And I added a little bit of chili oil to it as well,
Mm-hmm.
just a touch, because I like my sweet with my spicy. So I wouldn't have thought to do that. So thank you for throwing that out there, because I was like, well, I love curry, so why don't I just throw some things in there?
I I agree, and I think that everybody, as we get older, we learn what kinds of flavors really appeal to us, and translating a simple recipe like a popcorn ball into something that has a little bit of spice without all the sort of modern no high fructose corn syrup, no chocolate, no candy, no like gummy worms or something like that on it. Really gives us a whole new experience and connects us back to that time in history when adding spice to something would certainly make it a luxury. Yeah.
Now I know that you make this connection of cooking with memories and how we can connect with our families. Is there a recipe that you used to do with your grandmother that really sticks out to you that
Oh yes. Oh yes. She made something called butterscotch brownies,
ooh,
and it's got this brown sugar, cream, butter, and walnut uh, flavor profile that I was talking about earlier. And either we would make them together, or when I arrived at her house, I opened the door and I could smell them immediately, and I would go right to the pantry, and there they would be. No, they were still, cooling or something. She just knew that her grandchildren loved these butterscotch brownies, and that is one of my favorite all-time uh, family recipes.
that sounds
There
amazing.
are others too, but that one really sticks out in my mind as something that has that aroma that I associate with comfort food.
Is there anyone else who'd love to share like their favorite food memory? A recipe that they made, especially around Christmas time? Penny, anything that you can think of?
Well, tomato sauce of being Italian. The smell of onions and garlic and tomato and
Mm,
sausage. Yeah.
yeah.
That is comfort and home food.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be sweet. Yeah.
No, no. I had another question, Elise. How many popcorn balls did you make?
In in the last month,
Yeah.
I don't know, more than 100.
Oh my gosh.
I made about five or six big batches.
You
Yeah.
give them away?
I gave them away. Yeah. Um, I live in an apartment building, so sometimes they went into the mail room, and sometimes I gather with friends at happy hour, and I gave some away there, and then I gave some to my family at Thanksgiving, and yeah, we have a big family Thanksgiving, so that was a place to share a lot of them. Yeah, and when Penny and Savannah came over to shoot video one night, I think they went home with a few.
Yeah. Well, they were delicious, and yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up.
I did just want to say that one thing. This is not a question, but it is a comment, and that comment is, I looked online and in cookbooks for other examples of spiced popcorn balls, and I didn't find any. So we may be like uncovering new ground here. I'm just saying.
That's what we strive for here at Wisteria
Okay,
Host.
very good.
Uncover
Very
new
good.
ground.
That's great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I really appreciate it, and thank you, Elise, for all the time and effort. Thank you, Savannah, for helping us edit the video, and we will have it posted in the next few days on our YouTube channel, which is Wisteria Hearst. When you go to YouTube, look up Wisteria Hearst, and you'll see all of our online presentations. So thank you again, and
Thank you,
have a lovely rest of your day.
and happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Go make some popcorn balls.